illogical. Wait, what?
Okay, so after we finished building the deck, it was time to get it up onto the kayak. Once we popped it up onto the kayak, it was pretty obvious where the wood wasn't sitting correctly, so the shear's not sitting flush properly with the deck or the wrong angle against the hull. So we spent a bit of time drilling some extra holes, pulling the, loosening and pulling the wires to get that correct shape, especially around the deck forms. So this is where one of the deck forms are here, and this one you can even see still that the shear is a bit above the deck. These the ties that tie down to the deck form, tie the deck to the form, obviously pull this deck down onto it, and that makes it pop in past the shears. So loosening some of these off and allowing the deck to pop back up and come level with the shear was really important. We did attempt to do the shortcut trick, which is to use basically builder's wrap to instead of tying the deck to the hole, because you do have to do it several times in a row, you can get builder's plastic like this and just wrap around the deck. A couple of problems I had with that. First of all, it was very hard to get it to the right tightness, and a few too many wraps and the deck was just pulling down, going into the hole almost. The other thing is, it didn't help at all getting the right shape on the deck. It kind of compressed everything in, and the only thing so far that's worked for me is getting these tires and putting additional tires where it's needed and loosening them off where it's not to get that nice shape. If you just wrapped it in plastic, it did work, but the shape was not as nice. So at the end of the day, we've went with the instructions out of the book, which is basically to put these wooden pieces underneath, or between, should I say, rather, between the deck and the hull. After you've got it set up like that, you thread the wire through the top part, through the deck, and then through the bottom, loosely sort of tie it together, then remove the wood, drop the deck onto the hull and wire it in tight. So we're going to do that. So it is a good idea, and it does say so in the manual as well, to do dry runs of this, because the next step, once we're happy with this shape, is we're going to take the deck off again and we're going to epoxy all of these seams. So epoxy all the seams on the hull and the deck. The hull I'm not worried about, the hull will sit in the position it's in, but the deck, once we epoxy those seams, we then have to do this operation again before any of it starts going off and drying, and have it sit and tied to the hull. That is then going to be the shape of the kayak, and we leave it that way for 48 hours until the epoxy is cured and we have that shape. So this is a very important step, just to make sure we've got it all right, and I'm happy overall with the kayak. If we, once we start throwing epoxy around, that's it. It's stuck in that shape. At the moment, it's still completely adjustable. So let's get to it. All right, stage one done. We've wired the deck to the hole. You can see how we've just sort of left these open or very loose. And this next stage is going to be removing the timber chocks, dropping it down and tightening up the deck, being careful to try to keep everything level. So we'll probably do a couple of tightens on one side and then the other side, just to keep it even as we go along. All right, let's give it a go. It's just not dropping down.
Yeah. Such strong wire.
Well, there's the first problem. I was expecting it to drop down after we took the wood chocks out, but the wire's just holding it there, hovering above. I guess the wire's stronger than we thought, and the deck is lighter than I thought. Either way, we'll just get to lining up the front deck support with the top and bottom that sit on top of each other, and start wiring these together. So this is the next morning after letting the kayak sit overnight and the wood settle into its new form. I always find that after leaving it for 12 to 24 hours, it's a lot easier to adjust and to figure out where we're going to put in extra tyres. Like right here, for example, you can see this line's open. We'll just be able to squeeze that shut with a tyre there. Similar thing on either side of the bow there, and around the permanent bulkhead. You can see it bows out a little bit there. Worst case scenario, I'll fill this, when we put it together properly, I'll fill this with thickened epoxy and just shave that off. One thing that I did do, stupidly, the transom was pretty much perfect, and I was just trimming off these edges and high bits, and I don't know what came over me, but I trimmed this right back for some reason. Like, it was perfect, and I trimmed it back. I mean, this is a piece of wood I took out, so that's fine. When we put it together, what I'll do is I'll just stick this piece of wood in there, cover it in epoxy and whatever, and just sand that back. Obviously get it as close to where it should be as possible, and you'll barely notice. It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. So we've had the whole boat sitting now for a number of days, just with the deck stitched on and getting the wood comfortable sitting in that position. It's now time to commit to the shape of the boat. So the next step, I'm going to actually clip all the wires and remove the deck from the hull. Excuse me. I'm then going to go along and what they call tack weld. We're going to mix up some epoxy and thicken it to about the consistency of mustard or tomato sauce. Suck that up a syringe, and all along all the joints on the hull, we're going to squirt that mixture between the wires, trying not to get on the wires if possible, so then I can remove the wires later, and flatten that out with a tool. So it's just a bead at this point. We'll go back later and put a big fillet in, but for this part, just tack welding it together as I described. And at the bow and the stern, making a really thick mixture and really scraping that up into that, against the transom and the stern of the boat. Once that's done, we do this same process to the deck. So fillet all those seams, tack weld all those seams. And then I think I have to get my wife back down to help me. We are going to reattach the entire hull and the deck together, so those tack welds dry in place in the shape that the boat, that is it. The boat is going to be in that shape from then on, then on in. The next step after that is actually to take the deck off again. And this, actually, sorry, what was I saying? The next step will be to cut out the hatch in the stern. And then after that, once the hatch assembly has been completed, which we'll look at, it's again to take off the deck and properly fillet. I put in nice thick fillets on each joint, and so on. But we'll get to that in due course. So there's nothing to it, nothing for it, should I say. I can't even speak properly today. There's nothing for it except to get to it. We've put this boat, we've adjusted, we've tightened wires, we've loosened wires. At this point, we're just going to have to be happy, or rather, I'm just going to be happy with how it looks. So, time to get to it. Time to remove the deck, and then we'll move on from there. Hey guys, Future Sam here. Unfortunately, this is going to be a bit of a recurring theme over the next few steps. At this moment, I'm a bit further ahead in the filming, so I'm a few steps ahead in the boat build, and every single one of the epoxying scenes so far, I've failed to record properly. Once you start getting the epoxy out, you've got gloves on, there's sticky glue everywhere, the camera's already rolling, and if they're in the wrong position or you forgot to press record like I may have, that's it. But on the tack weld, I did have I mean, it all worked out in the end, don't get me wrong, but it was a bit of a struggle. Once I'd sucked the epoxy up into the syringe, I don't know if it was negative pressure in the syringe or what was going on, but it was constantly leaking out. Didn't matter if I held the syringe up or down or whatever. I had to work very quickly, which again is why I didn't get back to the camera. I had to lay those beads down very quickly. All in all, it went pretty well, and you were able to keep the epoxy off the wires fairly easily. It did get in a few places. But yeah, unfortunately for this step and for a few steps on, the epoxy seams just aren't there. So back to you, Pastor Sam. All right, so now we've got the kayak all glued together. The next step is to cut out the hatch in the aft. Now, I actually didn't want to make a hatch in the back of this boat at all, for a couple of reasons, but primarily because, to be honest, I didn't think I'd be able to cut a ellipsis nicely. So the piece that you cut out of the aft forms the actual hatch cover. So you have to make this cut pretty much perfect first go. There's no second chances, and at this point the deck is all glued together and wired up, and a mistake can be an absolute disaster. So of course I refer to the instructions to make sure that I get this right. Now again, I might just be an idiot, it's very possible, but the instructions I find are yet again lacking. So remembering that at this point in the procedure, the kayak is wired together, the deck and the hull are wired together, and it even references that in the instructions. It says at this point in the process, the deck and the hull are wired together. It then says to get the hatch spacer, because the hatch spacer, the inside ring of the hatch spacer, is what's going to be cut out and what is going to again form that hatch cover. And it's pre-drilled, and there's also drill holes on top of the boat so you can line everything up. And it says line up the holes and pass a wire through and tie it to the deck so it's in position. Well, how am I supposed to do that when the deck and the hull are wired together? It's pretty much impossible. I could pass a wire through, but how can I bring it back up? I can't get in there. If you remember, at the aft, just behind the seat in the kayak, is the permanent bulkhead. So I can't go in through the cockpit and find those wires. This is a sealed section. It makes no sense. So what I've ended up doing, you can have a look here. What I've ended up doing is placing the hatch spacer on top, and I've just passed these wires through the holes and bent them over. So they're just sort of sitting there, and that gives me, a bit of confidence in the right spot. It doesn't move easily. I then held this down and had a helper come and trace the inside for me. So the next step is obviously to cut this out. Again, I am not keen on using a jigsaw to do this. One tiny slip up and you're going to be just drifting off into the hull or the deck, sorry. That's going to cause a big problem. I was looking at getting a Japanese pool saw, and I stumbled upon this tool, which is my new favorite tool of the moment. So this is actually a Japanese saw. It looks very much like a box cutter and works in exactly the same way. But if I pull this out, you can see, if this is focusing properly, that it actually is a saw blade, and it's extremely thin and very flexible. So it comes with the wood blade by default, but you can also get a blade for cutting metal and a blade for just general garden pruning. It's very sharp. I've used it to cut through this wood several times, and thin and flexible, and I should just be able to go really slowly and just bring this around the hole and hopefully get a nice cut. The other thing that I'm going to do as I move forward, thinking about this, as I cut along the line here, say if I cut around to a third of this is going to start sagging in, especially when I get to about halfway. This is going to start sagging in. putting pressure on the bit of wood that I'm cutting and possibly ending up with raggy edges and that kind of thing. So as I go, each 10 centimeters, 15 centimeter cut I make, I'm then going to get a piece of painter's tape and put it across there, which I hope will just hold it up and I can get the whole way around without having that sag happen. Of course, I've got to get the knife through this hole. I am going to try it first, just seeing if using the end of it, I can just saw the hole through very slowly. If that doesn't work, I'm going to have to get a very thin drill bit and drill 5-6 holes along here to make a hole to get the knife in initially, sorry, and then just slowly cut it out from there. So let's get to it. Well, the best thing I can say about that was nerve-wracking. As soon as you just go off kilter by a tiny bit, you got to try to fix it. Rather than having, I did, not by much, but I did come out a few times, which I'll show here. And I just thought it better, instead of stopping and starting and having a visible cut in the hole, just to sort of round it out where I could and continue back into the ellipsis shape. So this is what he looks like now. Like I said, nerve-wracking. You can see, it's not perfect. I don't know if that's going to come up on camera, but it's certainly not. I did a better job at this end, but this end, especially here, I came out a bit here and then just kind of curved it back in to try to make that shape. So I don't know why CLC doesn't just machine this part out for you, to be perfectly honest. Maybe it's because of the pressure the deck's under until this point. It won't work very well, or you might break something. But even if they cut most of it out with a CNC router and just had little tabs that were holding it together, I think that'd be a lot easier. All right, the next step is to put in the hatch. So we've got the hatch spacer, which is going to sit inside, and that's going to match, or it should match, the absolute outside of this hole. And then under that, if we put all this together in one go, under that is going to fit the rim seal, kind of like this. This obviously I need to line that up. All right, so I've just stuck the hatch seal in place. And I'm just going to get my hatch and just place it, and that's pretty much what this is going to look like when we've completed it. I can tell the way it goes in because this line of green here matches up. Again, it's not perfect, but once you have this in place, that's pretty good. Personally, I'm quite happy with that. It's, I thought it was going to be much worse. As I explained earlier, I didn't want to do this at all. I didn't want to cut a hole in the deck. I want to just leave it. But you actually need to in order to be able to assemble this thing correctly. So, all good. I think that's good. I'm just going to put a line here so I know where I dry tested it. Because once you have all the epoxy on these surfaces, well, for me at least, it becomes a bit stressful. This is all going to be glue inside there. Also, I'll know where to stop applying the epoxy to. I obviously don't want all this epoxied, and I don't want any epoxy, if I can help, on this seam, because trying to sand that back, if I get big globs of epoxy here, is going to be an absolute nightmare. So when we're good to go, I'll glue these pieces up, stick them in, I'll put clamps on and just squeeze it out and try to get as rid of much epoxy as possible. If there's any epoxy on this bit, doesn't matter, that's going to have to be painted later anyway, just as long as it's not blobs, as long as it's smoothed out a little bit. And yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, we're going to leave it there for this one. Got quite a bit done. The deck is now ready for fielding. Everything's tack welded together. And once that epoxy's completely cured out and, well, we've got the time to do it, the deck has to come off again. And again, those thick seams or fillet of epoxy. Spoiler for the next episode, as I explained earlier, I didn't film that properly either. But we will get the fillets done and then start actually epoxying the inside of the deck and the hull, and see how far we get in the next one. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Why do I always lean forward to pick up the camera before I, actually stop recording? It's, something to ponder.